Well, good morning. Here we are. Actually, I'm doing one of these daily messages now on a day that you might be expecting Ryan to be here. But Ryan and Landon are at camp this week with a bunch of kids. And so I get to do 5 daily messages this week instead of just 3 as I normally do. And I'm thrilled to get to do this with you because we are continuing our walk with Jesus through the book of Mark. And we have come down now to Mark chapter 2, verses 21 and 22. Let me read you this, and then we'll talk about what this means. This is a very interesting passage. Jesus speaking. No one sews a patch of unshrunk cloth on an old garment. Otherwise, the patch pulls away from it, the new from the old, and a worse tear results. No one puts new wine into old wineskins. Otherwise, the wine will burst the skins, and the wine is lost, and the skins as well. But one puts new wine into fresh wineskins. So, what in the world is Jesus talking about here? It's this passage, as we read through it, almost seems to kind of stand alone. And therefore, it may be a little more difficult for us to understand if we're picturing it that way. But if we see this as a comment that Jesus is making that is really concerning all the teachings that he is giving, then in this, we actually see a new and a really powerfully hopeful message because he's promising something transformative in our lives. So let's take a look at this. The picture that we get in our minds when we read this, we have a picture of this unshrunk cloth on an old garment. And we picture that unshrunk cloth, then when it is washed along with the garment, it shrinks and it pulls that old garment together and it tears the old garment. And thus it ends up destroying what was meant to be a fix. And then we get into the talk about the wine and the wineskins. And the same idea is being set forth here. This is an illustration that would have been immediately understood by the people that were first hearing this. But it leaves us having to look into what this is all about because there's not many people who are walking around carrying a wineskin today, are there? And if there are those people that are walking around carrying wineskins, I suspect that they probably live in Portland or in Boulder or in Austin or in one of those cities that is a little different. And so let's give an explanation to this that we might better understand. When wine is new, it is unfermented. You hear a phrase, new wine, and that's what it's talking about. Here's kind of a sideline lesson here. The word in the Greek language for wine is the word oikos, and it means that juice that comes out of a grape. Now, new wine is freshly squeezed grape juice, as we would know it. But if that juice then goes through the fermentation process, then it becomes old wine. And when this fermentation process happens, that process puts off gas that causes the release of pressure, and it causes the wineskin to stretch. Therefore, in a new wineskin, that new wine is placed, and then it ferments and it stretches that wineskin to its capacity. And then that wineskin is useful as long as you put already fermented wine into that wineskin. But if you put new wine, unfermented juice into that old wineskin, and it has not, that old wineskin has already been stretched to its limit, then when the fermentation process begins, the pressure comes and there is further stretching attempted, but it bursts open the wineskin and both the wineskin and the wine are lost. So What does this have to do with discipleship? What was Jesus actually saying here? All of this teaching that Jesus is setting forth, everything that we see Jesus setting forth, is talking about making a new kind of person, making us into new people. I have used the phrase before, he makes us into a new humanity, because what he wants to bring about is something brand new. It's not just an alteration of the old, it's something altogether brand new. These disciples of Jesus would understand that by following him, they were being made into a new kind of person. So significant was this, and so understandable was this, even at the time, that when Nicodemus came to Jesus at night, it's at that point that Jesus said, "You must be born again." Born again is a phrase that we are used to in our culture because we talk about born again Christians, which, by the way, there's really no other kind of Christian than that. But that's a phrase that we are familiar with. Even non-believers may be familiar with it. But that's a brand new phrase to Nicodemus. And how odd he must have thought it was. How can a person be born again? He can't enter again into his mother's womb, can he, and be born? And so Nicodemus was puzzled by this. But what Jesus was saying was what happens when the teachings of Christ are administered to our lives. We become brand new people. It's not that he came along and wanted to just make a few alterations. They at that time couldn't just take their old established lives as had been guided by the law and the prophets and tack on a few new items. They couldn't just make these slight alterations and become then Christians. What Jesus was demanding was a complete reconstruction process, a reconstruction project, I guess. And that project would start with the death of the person. This is what we read about in Romans 6, when Paul said that we die to the old self, the old man, and we are buried in baptism so that we rise, we are resurrected into a newness of life. You see, people that were beginning to follow Jesus at that time, those early Jews that had been used to the law and the prophets, they couldn't remain followers of the first covenant and then just tack on a few more things. For instance, they couldn't just switch the day that they worshiped from the seventh day to the first day of the week and let that be their new identity. That was not nearly enough. Neither could they just stop giving animal sacrifices and then start suddenly observing what we now call the Lord's Supper and call themselves Christians. It wasn't these slight changes, slight in terms of behavior, that Jesus was looking for. He wasn't trying to just alter a behavior. He was trying to make a brand new person out of each one of us. And so we have this amazing path to follow. The old had to die. The old had to surrender. And the old had to go through this sanctification process where the purification of the soul happens, and so that this new person would then be born again. Well, these people were perhaps startled by this lesson. But let me say, today, I'm afraid if we stop and think about it, we also are going to be startled by it. Because this is a lesson that I don't think that we have handled well. We like to hang on to parts of our old life when we come to Christ. We like to think that we can just make a slight adjustment here and there and be pleasing to God. I'm afraid too often we convey the idea that ultimately what we want of people is that we want to baptize them and then we want to see them come to church every Sunday. Well, those things are necessary, yes. But that's not the transformation that Jesus had in mind. He didn't want us to just tack on a few other things. He wanted us to honestly be significantly transformed by the renewing of our minds as we follow Christ. So here's my plea for you today. I want you to think about this new wine in the old wineskin. I want you to think about this idea of what Jesus has come to do, not only to all of us as a group, but what Jesus has come to do to you. I want to remind you also that this transformation process doesn't just happen once. It's an ongoing process, and we are continually changed. We are continually being made new in Christ. And so take this idea into your prayers today and talk to God about this. Be ready for Him to do something, throw something at you that you may not have considered before. Be ready for Him to throw away the old garment and throw away the old wineskin and hand you something altogether new that makes you this new person in Christ. What does God want to do with your life today? It's probably not just a new patch. It's not just a new container. He wants to make you into a new person in Him. Take this to Him. See what happens to your life even today. And let this be a great day.